For today's video, we are going to learn how to refute the King's Gambit. So first of all, the King's Gambit comes after e4, e5, and white plays pawn to f4, which is the King's Gambit. Now, instead of showing you how to refute it with e takes f4, which is the line where you accept the gambit, as the famous saying by Emmanuel Lasker says, the best way to refute a gambit is to accept it. So here, I will disagree with that because after taking it, the main line goes knight to f3 to stop queen to h4 check, and then black plays pawn to g5, and then white is trying to attack it, so white plays pawn to h4, and after pawn to g4, it gets super messy after bishop to c4, and white sacrifices the knight and go for castle and go for a huge attack on the king's side. Yes, black is up a piece, but you don't want to allow that. You want also as a black to attack white. So here I will recommend you at the first, after pawn to f4, I will recommend you this aggressive counter gambit, which is pawn to d5, which is the falkbeer counter gambit. So here in this position, white has got many options to play, whether he can take on e5, whether he can take on d5, whether he can go knight f3, whether he can go knight c3. We will go through all of those variations, so stick around to the end because it is super tricky to play as black or as white. First of all, if white takes on e5, this is considered to be a beginner mistake. And why is that? It is because queen to h4 is gonna be a check, and white is going to be forced to go pawn to g3, and after pawn to g3, then queen takes e4 is going to win the rook, and black is going to win the game. And of course, also in case of white tried to play king to e2, then here it is a decisive attack after queen takes e4, king to f2, and now bishop to c5, and now after king to g3, there is actually a checkmate in 3 moves. I will recommend you to stop the video and try to find it and write it down on the comments below. So here, let's come back to our main position and let's take a look at the main line, which is e takes d5, and this is by far the most sound variation for white to play. Now here you can take on f4 and play ultra solid and ultra non-allowing counterplay for white, but this is a really super boring line, as also it gets super complicated as black got 4 pawns on the king side and white got 5 pawns on the queen side, so it's going to be super messy. So here we want to play in attacking spirit and by my Mikhail Tal spirit and going pawn to e4 just to try to gain more space, and now we are the one who are playing the gambit, not white. So here after e4 it takes away the f3 square for the white's knight to develop. So here white can go knight to c3, can go d3, and they are both the same. You are going to face this move with knight to f6 just to guard this pawn on e4. And now white is going to go pawn to d3 to try to challenge the center and try to take on e4. And now you want to pin this knight and continue developing your pieces, as you are ready now to castle and bring your rook to the e8. After black pins the knight on c3, then white has got 2 moves, and they are bishop to d2 and they are taking on e4, and we are going to take a look at both. First of all, let's start by taking on e4. Now we would love to castle, but unfortunately this will allow pawn to e5, and we want to keep the initiative, and by taking the pawn on e4, now we are hitting the knight, and after bishop to d2, here we will just want to castle and be ready to bring our rook to e8. But of course, in this position, after white takes on e4, then black is going to be losing a piece, as now your bishop on b4 is hanging, and if you trade on d2, then white is gonna recapture with his knight, so we just blundered a piece. So let's come back, and instead of castling, we wanna take this bishop on d2, and after white takes on d2, we just wanna castle here, and we are ready to bring our rook to the e-file and try to go for a really quick attack. Also keep in mind that in this position, you can also play this move, which is queen to h4 check, and if white goes king e2, then here you would have queen to e2, and after king to d3, you can play for bishop f5, and white is just going to get checkmated shortly. So let's come back to our main position, and here after white plays pawn to g3, then here we just can go knight takes g3 using the spin on the rook, and if in case of white takes the knight, then black is winning the rook, and here we are hitting the rook, of course, and if white takes it, then actually we don't want to take the rook, we want to take on g3 to deliver the checkmate very fast. So here after king to e2, we want to go bishop to g4 check, and here the knight white is forced to go to the f3 square, and after bishop takes f3, this might be also winning, but it's not checkmating. So here after queen takes f3, it is just a checkmate. After king to e1, then queen to g3 is a checkmate. So let's come back to our main position. So here after pawn to d3, and here white starts with knight to c3, and then black plays knight to f6, and here white plays pawn to d3, and now we want to play bishop to d2, bishop to b4, and here white may play bishop to d2 to try to cut off this pin from the black dark square bishop. So here in this position we can take on d3, but taking on d3 is actually such a bad move because white is going to recapture with his bishop and white is going to have no problems. So here we don't want to take on d3. Here I will show you the novelty, which is pawn to e3, actually hitting the bishop and yet sacrificing the second pawn for the initiative and to try to attack. So here white is forced to take on e3, and after white takes on e3, here we want to recapture the pawn on d5 with our knight hitting now the bishop and hitting the knight on c3. So here white is forced to go back to d2, and here we just want a castle. So of course now we are threatening rook to e8 check. So here white is forced to react. So here in case of white trades on d5, then here we want to play rook to e8 check, and after white blocks with the bishop to e2, then here we just want to sacrifice our bishop on b4 and just take on d5. And you can see that the falkbeer counter gambit, it is actually super aggressive. And why is that? As you can see, all of the black pieces are super active on the center and trying to attack. And now white is, of course, in case if he takes the bishop on b4, then we are going to capture on g2, winning this rook on h1. Actually here the best move for white is to just move the king to d2, but it is non-logical, and now actually white is losing. After e4 d5 and white takes on d5 and black goes pawn to e4, we are going to take a look at this move, which is bishop to b5, delivering the check to the black king. Now here there is bishop to d7 and black is completely fine, but even more stronger and more ambitious for black and it is pawn to c6. Now here white is forced to take on c6, and now knight to c6, there is no problem with it, but you want to keep the initiative and you want to recapture with your pawn. Yes, you are slightly damaging your structure, but on the other hand, white is wasting a lot of time, and actually white is super weak on the king side here. So after white plays bishop to c4, then here we can continue developing with knight to f6. In case of white plays queen to e2 to try to put pressure on the pawn on e4. Here we want to continue by playing bishop to c5, and after pawn to d3 to try to capture on e4, then we can just castle, and in case of white takes on e4, I want you guys to remember this theme, which is knight takes e4, and after queen takes e4, then there is rook to e8, which pins the white queen to the king, and black is winning the game on the spot. So let's come back to our main position, and instead of white going bishop to b5 check, then white can go pawn to c4 to try to defend his d5 pawn. And now we want to play pawn to c6 again, yet sacrificing the other pawn. And after white takes it, then here we just want to recapture with our knight. You can see in this position that not only that white weakened his king side by pushing the pawn on f4, and the whole king side is weak due to the weak dark squares here on the center and on the king side, but also he weakened his queen side by this move, pawn to c4. And actually now black is in a completely good shape. And why is that? And it is because that if white continues to play normal moves like knight to c3, then here we can also play some normal moves with bishop to c5, and you can see we will just keep our advantage by playing such a normal moves. And now white is in such a trouble on how to develop these pieces on the king side. Now if you want to play knight to e2, then you actually block this bishops, so this bishop won't be able to develop. And in case of you played bishop to e2, then you actually trap this knight, and this knight has got no way to develop. So here white is only try to keep the game alive. It is going pawn to d4 to sacrifice again the pawn, but to try to get an easy development. So here after bishop takes d4, then knight g e2 comes with the tempo hitting the black bishop, and here we want to play bishop to g4 to keep the pressure up, and after queen to c2 get out from the pin from this bishop. Then here we just want to continue developing with knight g to e7. And why exactly we play knight g to e7 and not knight to f6, as this knight is going to have a future on the d5 square, which is going to be towarding to the d4 square. So here after knight takes d4, then we will recapture with our knight on d4 hitting the white queen. Then after queen takes e4, here we can play bishop to f5, but I will try to castle first because the rook can be super useful on the e file. And also this queen is in the center is not feeling safe, as it is going to get attacked very quickly. So here the best move for white is to play bishop to d3 and go for checkmates. But here we want to block this diagonal, but we don't want to play pawn to g6 as it weakens the dark squares around the king. And in case if we played pawn to f5, then we actually might weakening this diagonal. So here the best move, which is bishop to f5, just hitting the white queen and the white bishop behind. So here queen to e3 is the best move. And now we don't want to trade as it helps white. Here we just want to continue developing with threats. Here the threat is going rook to e8, and also in a nice word we want to exchange on d3 and go knight to b4. And with rook to e8, and this is just will not be defendable for white, and white is going to lose the game. Now let's take a look at the craziest line between all we showed, which is pawn to d4. White is just saying, you know what, I am the one who is gambiting, you can't counter gambit me. So here in this position there is lots of moves. There is knight to f6, there is taking on d4, there is taking on f4, there is taking on e4. It is a super hilarious position. So here the main move, it is pawn takes d4. Of course white is not taking, white is logic behind this to go pawn to e5 and saying I am the one who is gonna gambit, and I am the one who is gonna control the square on f6, so you can develop your king side pieces easily. So here we wanna play on the spirit as we saw, and we're gonna go bishop to c5. Now in case of white plays pawn to c3, then this is actually not sound for white, as we are just going to take and we will drop back, and this bishop is gonna exert the pressure on the c3 pawn, and we will just develop normally with knight to e7, knight to f5, and castle king side. So here bishop to d2, and here we don't want to trade the bishops. We want to play queen to e7, defending our bishop, saying if white takes the bishop on b4, then we can recapture. And after white blocks the check with knight to d2, then we can take on b2, but it gets complicated after rook to b1. But here we want to play knight to h6 and just put our knight on f5 where it can jump to e3 and cause super problems on the king on the center of the board. So here let's come back and see, in case of white didn't push, in case of white takes on d4, what are we gonna do? So here we will develop normally with knight to f6 to defend our pawn on d5, as white was threatening it the last move. So here white is gonna push e5, and after white pushes e5, this is actually not good for white, as we are gonna go knight to e4, and now actually queen to h4 is a huge threat. So here white is gonna play knight to f3 to cover the h4 square, and now we will try to kick this queen away and gain another tempo with bishop to c5. And you can see that how this is going super wrong for white, as white's queen is a target. So here queen to a4 is the best move, giving a check. And now we want to block with our bishop to gain yet another tempo. And after bishop to b5, we don't want to trade, as if we trade, then white maybe can get some chances after taking on b7. So here we don't want to trade, we can just castle and let white trade, as if white trades on d7, then here we have bishop to f2 intermezzo, and after king to e2, then there is knight takes d7, and the black is winning the game. Now this is the end of our video. I hope you guys liked it. Make sure to watch our latest video on the traps on the Danish Gambit, and goodbye.